there's been some pretty effective lobbying behind the scenes by crypto companies and I think other interested parties, it's fair to say. And the new bill, the new draft of the bill that we've now seen and that is going to be signed into law very soon, if not already, that is a lot more pro-crypto. They've taken out some of this crazier stuff. They have, I think, accepted as well.
Why do you think?
I think it mostly focuses around stablecoins. So stablecoins have been a bit of a bugbear for regulators everywhere. And I think the overarching reason for that is because regulators view them as an essential competitor to the CBDCs, to the central bank digital currencies that they're all looking to roll out at some point. Now, what we've seen in the US, especially with the likes of USDC, with the likes of Circle, which issues USDC, and also Paxos, both of which are pretty heavily regulated companies. In order to back their stablecoins, they have to buy US government debt, essentially. That's what that US government debt, mostly I think 2-year treasuries, is the majority asset that backs these stablecoins. So what they are doing is essentially financing US government spending. And so to bring it back to Europe, now obviously in Europe for a long time, we've seen negative interest rates from the ECB because of the nature of the European Union, I guess, because of these diverse economies across the EU. So it's been basically impossible or not worth anyone's while to issue a euro-backed stablecoin, a euro-pegged stablecoin, because there is no way that the company issuing it could make any. So what I think is really interesting about this bill is that it's kind of accepted that. We now have a euro stablecoin, which is coincidentally also issued by Circle. We've obviously seen the ECB raise interest rates above negative for the first time. And I think what MICA essentially says is that Europe is accepting not just crypto, it's accepting stable coins, it's accepting that they have a role to play behind the scenes in order to subsidize spending. They are basically a source of liquidity. They are bringing money in. And I think as well there's a sense that crypto innovation, if it's not allowed to flourish in Europe, which let's remember has an enormous concentration of the right kind of people, people, financially literate people, but also computer literate people as well. And I think there is a real concern among figures in the EU now that if something isn't done to nurture the crypto industry there, then there will be a brain drain. These people will go elsewhere. They'll come to places like here, to places like Dubai. They'll go abroad. They'll go across to Singapore. Or proof of work miners will, and I mean we're talking Bitcoin here because Bitcoin is really the only particularly significant crypto, I suppose, that uses proof of work still. Crypto miners, Bitcoin miners, will always go where energy is cheapest and where regulations are easiest. And we've seen this before. I mean, when China cracked down on Bitcoin mining a few years ago, only last year, in fact, we saw those Bitcoin miners basically up sticks and move to other more welcoming jurisdictions. And I think there will always be those other jurisdictions that are willing to welcome this part of the industry. And indeed, I mean, we're seeing this in parts of the states as well, because certain US states, namely, I think Texas is the best example, are saying, well, hang on, these guys are, okay, these guys use a lot of energy, but they are producing something tangibly useful. So let's attract them. Let's attract them and their capital. So I think, yeah, we will see if the EU does crack down on proof of work, then we'll see those miners migrate elsewhere. And I think obviously Europe's energy problems at the moment are more pronounced really than anywhere else. So part of me does wonder really whether accountable organizations, it basically remains the same. It remains to be, how can we just regulate this? How can we quote unquote protect investors, all that sort of stuff, without giving, I think, enough thought to how can we meet in the middle? How can we regulate, but also encourage this industry to grow?
Is the real incentive to protect individuals? Do you think that that's the real motive, or is that just the pretext?
I think the real incentive is to figure out how they can tax this industry. How they can extract the most money from it. And I just don't think that we've seen. I don't think that we've seen the right sort of moves to protect investors from anyone. They never seem to be picking the right targets. It's always going. It might be the SEC going after someone high profile like Kim Kardashian or anything like that. I think what needs to be done more is to crack down on these Ponzi scheme projects themselves. But we just don't see any kind of joint. When Terra collapsed a few months ago, and obviously that was terrible for a lot of investors. But yeah, that was certainly, I think, gave a sense that these wider organizations, they are waiting for the next crash, because yeah, as you say, that does serve as an excellent pretext and go, oh well, people are losing money on crypto, therefore we have to stop it without looking at any sort of longer term picture.
The idea of
I guess you'd call sort of black swans for the crypto market in that sense. I think one is if the internet was to be shut down, which I think is probably, hopefully, fairly unlikely.
I don't know, we've got a lot of power outages out there. But
There certainly are. We can't rule anything out. I think the other threat is, coordinated global legislation. And I think, again, this is what worries me about organizations like the IMF. Right. They have influence in so many different jurisdictions, and they are, I think they are often able to provide the links between them. However, that said, I think the chances of any sort of global standard of regulations, I think that is pretty unlikely, because I think the world is becoming so much more polarized now. And I think the Russia invading Ukraine is a great example. We are seeing very much a split between East and West. And I think that split is and I think it'll also widen as well between the so-called developed world and developing world as well. I think we are going to see more polarization between countries and between regions. And I think that is going to make it very difficult for any sort of global standard of regulation to come into being. 100% that I don't think Bitcoin will ever go to zero. I think Bitcoin still has a lot of challenges ahead of it. I think the crypto sector as a whole has a lot of challenges ahead of it. And I do believe that there are lots of organizations out there, like the IMF, like the Bank for International Settlements, like the Financial Action Task Force, that do actively want to destroy the industry. And that does trouble me. But if we're talking about Bitcoin itself, the rabbit is out of the hat, if you like. The genie is out of the bottle, maybe a better analogy. But yes, and that's what for me is so fascinating about it. This is something that's out in the world. It's beyond the reach of governments. And I do get the sense that governments are beginning to accept that now. We're hearing kind of less of this sort of rhetoric. We're hearing less of people saying, oh, well, we need to turn off the blockchain and things like that. Because I think, they're starting to realize that you can't just turn off the Bitcoin blockchain. You can't just stop this thing that's in motion. But yeah, there are still challenges, certainly.